What does it mean to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed? We build civilizations on laws, on the idea that to break a rule is to invite a consequence, a fine, a prison sentence. But there exists in the dark annals of our past a different language of consequence, a grammar written not in ink, but in blood, bone, and terror. This is not a history of justice. This is a descent into the human imagination when it becomes obsessed with one thing, the design of suffering. When punishment stops being a deterrent and becomes a spectacle, a ritual, a dark art meant to etch a lesson not just on the body, but on the very soul of a society. Our journey begins not with a tool, but with a concept, prolonged agony. The ancient Persians, masters of empire, were also connoisseurs of this grim craft. They practiced a method known as Scaphism, a word that sounds gentle, almost musical. The reality was a masterpiece of horror. The condemned was placed in the hollow space between two narrow rowboats or hollowed-out tree trunks, their head, hands, and feet protruding. Force-fed a mixture of milk and honey to induce severe diarrhea, they were then smeared with the same substance. They were left floating on a stagnant pond or simply exposed. The feeding continued. In the sweltering heat, the concoction would sour and putrefy. Insects would come, flies, ants, wasps. They would begin to feed and burrow and lay eggs. The victim, trapped and immobilized, would experience the slow, creeping invasion of their own body by decay and scavengers. Death took days, sometimes weeks, in a feverish nightmare of consumption from the outside in. It was a punishment that weaponized nature itself, turning life's fundamentals, food, skin, the very air, into instruments of an unspeakable end. If Scaphism was a slow, natural decay, medieval Europe sought to match spiritual sins with physically poetic torments. Betrayal of one's lord or king was not merely a crime, it was a tearing of the cosmic order. For this, the punishment was hanged, drawn, and quartered. It was a public theater in 3 brutal acts. First, the condemned was dragged to the site, often face down on a hurdle, symbolizing their unworthiness to walk on God's earth. Then they were hanged by the neck, but not to death. They were cut down, still conscious, at the very brink. Then came the drawing, disembowelment. The executioner's knife would open the abdomen. The organs would be drawn out and burned before the victim's eyes, a purging of their inner treachery. Finally, quartering. The body was hacked into 4 parts. The head and limbs were often parboiled in salt and cumin to preserve them, then displayed on spikes in prominent cities as a ghastly roadmap of the consequences of treason. The message was absolute. You sought to dismantle the body politic. We will dismantle you, publicly and ritually, until not a single part of you remains whole. But what of punishments meant not just to destroy, but to humiliate, to pervert the very essence of a person? In ancient Rome, for a parricide, one who killed their parent, a special sack awaited, the Poena Cullei. The murderer was first scourged till they bled. Then they were sewn into a leather sack together with a rooster, a viper, a monkey, and a dog. These were not random choices. Each animal represented a profound insult. The rooster for foolishness, the viper for evil, the monkey for mimicry of humanity, the dog for servile ingratitude. The sack was then thrown into a river or the sea. The victim's final moments were spent in a pitch-black, suffocating chaos of pecking, biting, and scratching, drowned in the company of symbols of their own moral deformity. It was a punishment that said, your crime has removed your humanity, so you will die not among men, but as a beast among beasts. Sometimes the goal was pure, unadulterated terror on an industrial scale. The Brazen Bull of ancient Sicily, allegedly created for the tyrant Phalaris, was a feat of sadistic engineering. A life-sized bull made entirely of bronze, it was hollow with a door on its side. The condemned would be locked inside, and a fire was set beneath the metal beast. As the bull heated, the person within would roast alive. The design included a complex system of tubes and pipes in the bull's snout that converted their screams into the sound of a bull's bellowing.
The tyrant could thus enjoy both the spectacle and the illusion that the metal animal was coming to life, its roar the soundtrack of a human being turned to ash. It was punishment as perverse art, blending agony, illusion, and royal entertainment.
East Asia contributed its own zenith of prolonged suffering with Lingchi, known in the West as death by 1,000 cuts, or the slow slicing. Practiced in China for severe crimes like treason or patricide, it was a process that could last hours. The prisoner was tied to a frame in a public square. With meticulous precision, the executioner would use a knife to remove portions of the body, often starting with non-vital areas like the eyelids or limbs. The aim was to inflict maximum pain without causing immediate loss of consciousness. It was a public demonstration of the state's absolute power to deconstruct a person, piece by symbolic piece. Some interpretations held it as a spiritual punishment as well, as a mutilated body was believed to be unfit for the afterlife. The victim was erased in the present and the hereafter. We travel to the colonial era, to the practice of gibbeting. Hanging was common, but for pirates or highwaymen, the lesson needed to last. After execution, the body would be coated in tar or placed in an iron cage shaped to the human form, a gibbet cage. It was then suspended from a post in a prominent location, a river estuary, a crossroads, a hill. There, the body would be left for years to be picked apart by birds and bleached by the sun, slowly twisting in the wind. It became a landmark. Sailors entering London's Thames would see the blackened skeletal remains of pirates gibbeted at Execution Dock, a silent, creaking warning that stretched across years. This was punishment that defied time, turning a corpse into a permanent monument to the cost of transgression. In the depths of the 20th century, the scale of punishment became bureaucratic, industrial, and genocidal. The extermination camp was not a single tool, but a system designed for the punishment of existence itself, based on ethnicity, belief, or identity. The gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor were the horrific culmination of this logic. People were processed like raw material, led into rooms under the false pretense of showers, and murdered with Zyklon B gas. Their bodies were then reduced to ash in crematoria. This was punishment stripped of any individual pretense of justice, administered with cold, factory-like efficiency to millions. It represented the absolute worst, when the state's punishment apparatus decides that the crime is being borne, and the sentence is total, anonymous annihilation. Why do we recount these horrors? Is it merely to shock, to marvel at the darkness? No. We walk this grim path to understand the abyss that opens when punishment sheds the last vestiges of proportionality, of humanity, of the goal of correction. These methods, from the personal cruelty of the Brazen Bull to the impersonal horror of the gas chamber, are landmarks on a map of human potential. They show us what happens when anger, fear, prejudice, or absolute power are given the tools of ultimate expression. They are the antithesis of civilization. They are the point where society stops saying, "You did wrong," and starts screaming, "You must become an example of pain." The worst punishments in history are not measured in pain, but in the distance they create between what we are and what we are capable of becoming.